Hello everybody, this is D.H. Thorne. In about a week or so, I'm going to be announcing the release of a new book. This book is going to be called The Infernal Vampire Handbook. This book is a small work. It's not the biggest one I've ever written. It's about 43,000 words. It's going to clock in around, about 160 some odd pages. It's going to be about two-thirds about as thick as Shadownomicon. And I'll be doing an announcement video about that very soon, probably sometime in the next week. I should be getting my my test copy sometime Wednesday or Thursday, the week coming up, so around the 12th or 13th. And I should be able to release the book officially pretty close to that. In fact, probably during my live stream on Thursday, I'll be talking about it. So I'll probably be releasing it very shortly after I get it, assuming there's no problems with it. I'll look it over in printed form, see if there's any glaring errors or mistakes that need to be corrected, and if so, I'll do that first. But if not, it'll be coming out sometime either next week or the very early next week after that. So sometime around the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, you'll be getting a notification that it's up. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the subject of vampirism, and actually I wanted to have a little bit of fun today and go on a trip down memory lane. Once upon a time, late 90s, early 2000s, I was actually relatively active. I was actually quite active, really, on the internet as a webmaster. And back in the day, that meant something. You know, back in the day, we didn't have these websites that would help you build a blog or a website for you. You had to learn how to do all the coding. You had to learn how to make or find graphics that would work for you. And so I had learned and taught myself all these things. In fact, I was a professional web designer for a little while. I was a director of art department, graphic arts department, in this one small little fly-by-night website. Actually kind of ruined my credit for a while because I borrowed a lot of money to try to make that job work. And in so doing, I had kind of lost my shirt. They owed me about $3,000 or $4,000, and they never paid me back. And to a young guy in his early 20s, that's a big deal. You know, I couldn't afford that, and so especially out of work, I got screwed, right? Well, anyway, it was around this time, shortly in between when the Shadows and I were sort of starting to part ways. I was getting more and more into vampirism because I needed to find a way to supplement the energy deficit that these spiritual beings were imposing upon me, because I had several different sources, if you will, several different head vampires of what was causing me to have vampiric nature. You know, I had family issues. Certainly there were vampires in my life, personal ones, not just family, friends too. But the shadow people in particular are very vampiric beings. If you have read through Shadownomicon, I'm very clear about this. And in fact, a large number of people who suffer from or experience the condition of vampirism can probably trace that to a shadow being at some point. Or at least they're very much heavily involved. They may not be the cause, but they're certainly part of the process. So being directly connected to shadow people means I, of course, had an energy deficit in my spiritual egregoric body. Now, I talk a lot about that in the coming book. It's one of the bigger sections of the book is trying to explain and describe what I believe from the metaphysical perspective vampirism really is. And this has always been a fascination of mine because at the time, vampirism, we'll say, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, the subject of vampirism was becoming more and more mainstream as a kind of alternative lifestyle, as a LARPing lifestyle, as an alternative lifestyle. And the concept of what today we call otherkin was just starting. And otherkin's a fascinating subject to me because on the one hand, I think it's been abused as a term. I think it's become just another way to participate in identity politics. So to speak. But I think a lot of people truly and honestly, if they do enough soul searching, will find that their spiritual archetype, the thing that they really are inside, may not be strictly human in the sense that they're human, but they're not strictly human. There's something else going on. And vampire was something that was starting to become recognized, at least in the more open-minded, esoteric pop culture circles, as a real condition or feature of humanity, if you will, that a lot of humans could be born with, develop, or otherwise demonstrate vampiric abilities. And it was right around this time period, the year 2000-ish, a little bit earlier, when this became sort of, I don't want to say mainstream, but in the right circles it was mainstream. You could go to a goth club and claim to be a vampire, and you'd only raise a few eyebrows. Goth people are pretty interesting. As open-minded as goth people tend to be, they're also very cliquish. And they don't really like when posers come in. We didn't like when when you had all the baby bat Mansonites would come in and they'd say, "Oh, we're goth." Like, yeah, sure. The Nine Inch Nails people. We had nothing against that stuff. We enjoyed that stuff from a cultural perspective. But to call yourselves goth because you listened to Manson a few times, or even Typo Negative or something, that's not goth. That's not really what goth was, at least not then. Today you could probably include it, I guess, in some of the broader definitions. But so there was a sort of elitist air to a lot of us. I don't think we ever really lose that. I think that remained no matter what. But it also translated and transferred into this sort of, vampire goth. It became a more normal trend, and more people started to role play and lifestyle in the vampire way. And this actually is blown up. You have figures like Father Sebastian, who right now, I guess, I'm not sure how I feel about what he teaches and shows, but he's very well respected. He started off as a fangsmith, and I probably ran into him once or twice, at club balls way back, early 2000s. I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe not met him, but I wouldn't be surprised if I encountered him or some of his people back then. But back then, I was actually similar to how I am now. I was a major participant in some esoteric things, and back then I was embarrassingly bad at it. Okay, I want to tell you quite honestly that when I look at the content that I had from back then, because I actually found on the Wayback Machine, my old website, and I was able to find some snippets of my stuff from other websites, and my writing was atrocious. My esoteric metaphysical ideas were rather basic and very primitive, very clumsy, very bad, but this was well over 20 years ago. Okay, I hadn't developed any of the intellect that I have now. I guess I was kind of coming out of things, and I was quite charismatic, and I was able to do quite a bit of artwork and stuff. And I'm actually going to show you a clip. I guess maybe I'll insert it, maybe I'll already have shown you, but I'll insert it somewhere during this video, of my old website's flash introduction that I had a long time ago, just so you can kind of see where I was at back then. You can kind of see what I was into, very much into fallen angels and demons, just as I am now, but I had a much more Christian perspective, very pop culture kind of perspective. And back then, I was actually part of a major web ring for Sanguinarius and the Dark 100, and there was a couple of website rings that I was a part of, and I was, depending upon which one, I was in like the top 10, top 20. So my website got quite a few hits, and even though it was really basic, back then that's all there was. I mean, let's be honest. Back in those days, again, we didn't have the resources we have now. We're talking 20 plus years ago when I made this website originally, and I was going on just what I could intuit and divine and channel and figure out from my own understanding of things, and so it was very basic. And again, it was a 20-something, it was a teenager, it was an edgelord's website. Okay, let's be brutally honest with myself. I was an edgelord back then, and so of course my website was very angsty and edgy and very useless in today's perspective, but back then it was one of the only ones, and so my voice was actually, was very low tier, but it was definitely a contributing factor to the spiritual growth and normalization of the vampire otherkin community. And I both echoed and advanced certain ideas that some of them linger today as part of the current lore of what vampires are and how they work and how they operate. So back, it was really kind of an interesting time to be involved in these things, because it was, there wasn't quite this big community of occultists and things. There wasn't, in all honesty, you couldn't find a lot of books on these subjects. There was no real conversation about them. There were no YouTubes. There was no podcasts. There was none of this stuff. It was entirely these little web rings, And for those of you who are too young to know, once upon a time, the internet was a lot more. And when I say a lot more, it was a lot more varied than just Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. The internet was just a huge, huge collection of individual websites. Some of you might remember MySpace and things like that. Well, even MySpace is new for me. When I got interested in the internet, we were still using bulletin board services, and these were these kind of dial-up networks that you'd call into, and you could chat with people. They had games you could play. You had little profiles you could make for yourself, little chat rooms you could design for yourself. And they were fun because you'd learn about them through word of mouth, and someone would operate them. They would pay whatever it cost. I think it was like a T1 server or something. They'd buy, time on or something like that. They'd host this, usually as a hobby project, and you'd literally have to call into it with a phone number. Usually there wasn't even like a website link. You actually had to dial in a phone number to get to it. And once you were there, it was how you connected to the rest of the internet. Even this was, they had a web browser even built into them. So it was quite interesting, and there was some interesting ones that I belonged to. We would have conversations. Maybe there might be like 200 people on the bulletin board serving your community, which was kind of cool because you could actually have people you could meet in person, because generally speaking, since these were spread word of mouth, you could actually, and this was the only game in town. We didn't have Facebook and all this crap. The nerds, basically, the goth people in particular, because a lot of goth people were nerdy people, right? We'd all get together on these bulletin boards, and we'd schedule to meet. We'd meet each other. Very often we were from the same areas. Once in a while you get people, that were not local. But so this was pretty cool because we'd get together and we'd have these meetings on these bulletin board services. So it was a lot of fun, and a lot of stuff was exchanged there as well. So as time went on and we started using bulletin boards less and less, and websites more and more, and I got into websites. It was fun to try to figure out how to do the coding for a website, because back then we didn't have these things where I feel like a grandpa right now. Most of you don't realize how old I am. We didn't have these programs that you could just enter in a few details and what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG style interfaces where you could design a web page by eye. You had Notepad, and you had to go in with Notepad, and you had to know your codes and have copy pasted snippets of codes, and you'd have to look at manuals and books, and you'd have to buy the latest manuals to get the updated codes and find the websites that had the snippets you wanted. And it was a lot of fun actually, but it was actually hard too. So even getting a basic website with frames, we called it frames back then. Like when you go to a website now and you have the one side is a column of links, and then there's maybe another thing on top, and all of these things do different things. Well, back then that was the new thing. That was, when you were looking for a job as a web developer, they would ask, do you know how to do frames? Do you know how to do Java? Do you know how to do Flash? Do you know how to do these kind of animations? And, each one of those things would, get you $5 an hour, basically more than the other guy. So $2 to $5 more an hour. So it was good to know all these different things, and you could throw yourself into the ring. So it was quite a wild time to be involved in all this. Well, anyway, so I started designing websites back then. I started getting involved in these communities, and honestly, looking back, when I look back at that website, no, I won't give you the name of the website because I'm too embarrassed to share it, but I'll show you the cool parts from it. I miss and I enjoy the aesthetic. Yes, it's really ghetto by comparison to today. The stuff I could do now is much better. The music would be better. The sound would be better. I could probably learn to do animation a lot better, and certainly the graphics would be better. But back then, this was the creme de la creme. This was the year 2000. Not many people could do what I did. So I was impressed with it, and I got jobs based on stuff like this. I'd show people my website as a demonstration of what I could do, and they were all, "Oh wow, this is so great." So I bring all this up because this is where I got my feet wet in vampirism. This is a practice that I had learned and studied and found out about myself for a long time. And vampirism is a thing that, I don't want to give too much of the book away, of course, too early, but there's, of course, this question of what is a vampire and where do they come from? How are they invented, if you will? Are they invented? Is this such a thing you can become? Is this something you're born as? Is it biological? Is it only spiritual? I'm inclined to believe, from my own personal research and meeting hundreds and hundreds of vampires in my lifetime, either through club hopping, internet, communication. Well over 100 vampires, self-proclaimed vampires, have I ever met. And the most common denominator to me, especially as someone who can sense things, someone with an energy sense, someone with an empathic sense, was that none of these people were real. And what do I mean by that? I have a joke that I tell other people, especially other vampires, especially ones that are my age. I say there's not a lot of vampires after 30. Most people who are vampires are younger than 30. A handful are over 40, and there's almost never any in their 60s. People who are vampires, it's like a phase, right? Because what you have to understand is the majority of people who fall into this vampire otherkin community are people who are in love with the aesthetic, they're in love with the pop culture, they're in love with the fiction, they're in love with the fantasy, and they don't realize what vampirism really is from an esoteric perspective. So this is not to say that there are not real vampires. There certainly are, and many of these people, in fact, are real vampires, but what they think real vampires are is wrong. And what I mean by this is, when we look at a modern day vampire, or someone even in the last 20 years, back when I was younger, who was living that vampire lifestyle as an open, awakened vampire, living their life intentionally feeding from people one way or another, they would adopt this Victorian, classical Elizabethan, sometimes, the 1600s, 1700s. They'd have this affectation, this role play of being ancient, and so they'd learn ways of speaking. They would learn to affect an Old English accent. They would suddenly get into French poetry and all this kind of goofy shit. They'd wear frilly sleeves, and I'm not going to say I wasn't one of them, because I definitely had an interest in that a little bit too. But this was a thing that was done, okay? But that's not vampirism, right? That's not vampirism. But there is an aspect of that is this flamboyance, this acting out, much like the way today I'll still dress up. I will wear my ritual garb, or at least some versions of it, in public quite frequently, especially in the fall when it's more comfortable to wear robes and things, and I'm not embarrassed to do so. In fact, people stare at you and they see I have one glove and I have the robes on, and I sometimes have a big medallion and all the rings, and my hair is like, I get a lot of eyeballs on me. Now that's actually not just invoking myself into that sorcerer's space, I'm actually also feeding on people as I go by. Their attention feeds me as I'm going by them. I skim off the top, that little bit of attention. Good or bad, it's energy that's coming towards me. And I love that. The eyes on me going, what is with this dude? What is this guy all about? This is how it is for all of these vampires. They just don't realize it. And if you go back in history, no, they weren't affecting, Victorian accents, but they might have been somehow standing out from the rest of the community. They might have been acting out. Maybe they were thespians. Maybe they were activistic people. Maybe they had jobs where they could be public. However they did it, they would often be showmen or showwomen, okay? And this is not unusual. Most real vampires have a tendency, and I don't put this in the book per se, but you can kind of extrapolate from what I'm saying that this is the case. And so we know that vampirism is not this act, okay? That's not what vampirism is. Vampirism is actually something much more subtle, and it's a thing that can be it can be felt by sensitive people. You can feel when someone is vampiric. especially if they're acting on it. Now, when I said before that there's people who are like, there's no old vampires, it's because most of the time people grow out of that kind of phase of play acting like a vampire. They either intentionally or incidentally either heal the energy imbalance that causes their need for energy, or they just learn more and more subtle ways of feeding that's more and more sophisticated, that is subconscious, and they don't need to do it on purpose. They get what they need from their life. In other words, they've kind of healed the imbalance somehow, either because their energy body has been restored to a more, I don't want to say natural state, because I do believe vampirism is a natural occurrence. I don't think vampirism is unnatural at all. In fact, I'm quite stern about this in the book. Even though I call it a condition, I don't mean condition like you have cancer or you have a disease. I mean a condition in the sense that it is simply a condition of what your energy body is like. And I believe that all vampirism stems from that energy body differential between one type of person and another. Some people are just, they need more energy than they give out, or they need more of a certain kind of energy than they give out. And a lot of the times this can be traced to a chakra that's underperforming or even overperforming. This can also be traced to other people's abusing them and trauma that they've been under. In fact, you can be traumatized in the womb. You can be a child of a narcissistic parent or an abusive parent who, even while you were an infant in the womb, even when you're still developing, they already have a really dark way of thinking about you, and that energy can influence you even as an infant, maybe even more so as an infant. And you can be born quite literally with a hunger, with a thirst for attention, love, and energy that you wouldn't have otherwise. And so this book, we go into some of those details, and I talk about these things. And I want to make sure you understand that over time, people mature and they realize that vampirism is not this act. It is not this edgy thing that I probably showed you already. That's just the childish edgelord expression of things they don't quite yet understand about themselves. They're learning to express themselves, their need to gain energy from others, to feed upon others, and to do so in a reasonable and responsible way. You know, you can be a villain your whole life. You can feed from people in a baneful way your whole life. And in fact, the vast majority of people who don't awaken to their vampire nature do in fact feed from people in a baneful manner. People who awaken to their vampire nature tend to recognize that they are much better served. They gain way more energy in a much healthier way when they do something reciprocal or symbiotic to earn it. People who are unawakened, they just have an entitled attitude perhaps. They are usually almost always narcissistic or fully narcissist. Someone with this narcissistic trait is very likely to be. In fact, I've never met a narcissist that wasn't a vampire, we'll put it that way. So strongly narcissistic people. I'm a little narcissistic in my behavior. I am not a narcissist internally, I don't believe, although I've definitely sought answers to some of my behavior and asked myself those questions. I've asked people, do you think I'm a narcissist? And what do you think about me? And some people say, well, you can definitely act a little conceited. You can definitely act a little arrogant and egotistical. You certainly have a kind of self-centered way about you, but you are always, undoing that perception by certain behaviors and things like that. So I don't think I really qualify as an actual narcissist, but certainly narcissistic tendencies. And that's a very common trait you can find in people. When you discover someone who you think is a vampire, it's almost always going to have that quality somewhere. In some way, even if they're shy, okay? A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that vampires are always outgoing. In fact, I made it sound that way before. Not entirely true. Vampires can actually also be quite passive and internal and introverted. However, they will have a narcissistic streak, and they will have a little clique around them. They'll have people around them which they feed upon. Now, people who are awakened vampires, they tend to find ways to do what they do in a much more subtle and controlled way. People who realize that this is what they are, or that they have these tendencies, even if they don't think I'm a vampire, they may not think that. They may not have that thought, but they may recognize that they use people, or that they feel better when people are giving them energy, when they're doing something to gain energy. And so they find a way to to reciprocate. And this is a natural thing. In humanity, in fact, in all things, especially living things, there is a need to exchange energy. And I don't just mean, electricity or something. I don't even mean just emotional energy. I mean energy as in life force, as in the prana and the chi and the life force of your body is always being exchanged, even over vast distances. When I talk with JD, EA, El the Alchemist, people from Dark Sorcery, and all these other people when I was in that, when I talk to these people, the energy exchange was still happening, even though the physical distance was very far. The energetic distance is very close. You have to recognize that the spiritual energy, distance almost doesn't matter. The only thing that distance does when it comes to energy is perceptual, is rationalization. If it's harder for you to visualize and feel where a person is and how to interact with them, it can be very difficult to send and receive energy from such a person. But when you can make a connection, video, verbal, something, when you can make this connection, even texting to a degree, when you can make that connection, when you know that person is syncretized with you somewhere, something about you can hone in on that, and you can target that and exchange energy that way. It's difficult without practice, but we all do it, okay? We do it all the time. When you guys watch my videos, I've had a lot of people comment to me, I got a lot out of this. This spirit was speaking to me, and you put the video up, and well, that's actually an energetic exchange, okay? In a spiritual way, there's an energetic exchange going on there. Well, when someone's vampiric, that exchange generally is one direction. They're the type of person who's going to come to you with lots of problems. They're always going to be asking you for help, and they're never going to reciprocate. One of the things that I have difficulty with is responding to compliments. Perhaps because of the way I was raised. Perhaps because I'm not generous with my compliments. I'm generally very, I am not the type of person to hide what I feel, but I'm certainly kind of stingy with compliments, and it's not because I don't like people. I've actually told people, and it's such an arrogant thing to say, the highest compliment I can pay you is that I want to be around you. And in fact, that is way more honest than anything nice that I could say. If I say, hey, let's hang out, let's do this, why don't you come on my show? That's the most sincerest form of and usually the only compliment that I'm prone to give people. I'm very guarded about energy I give out, because I think, having such powerful vampires in my life that are constantly seeking validation in the form of compliments and what can you do for me now kind of attitude. So I'm a little bit more guarded about giving out compliments and respect and concern and anything like that, because I'm used to people abusing that. So that's a truth about me that I'm revealing to you, and I hope you guys enjoy it. You can't really use it against me. I hope you don't try. But the point is that this is kind of like another symptom. Someone who tends to be vampiric will either be very guarded because they know that their energy is not as stable as other people's. They know that they can go into a low energy state, and then they're going to be draining everybody. They're going to be very vain and sucking everybody's energy out. Maybe they know that, or maybe they subconsciously know it, so they act that way. But then the alternative to that, some people have the opposite problem. They are exquisitely outgoing, they're exquisitely generous and kind, and they give and give and give because they expect, whether it's intentional or not, some sort of reciprocation. They'll be the ones that say they love you all the time. They'll be the ones who are buying you things all the time. They'll be the ones that are constantly telling you how good you are, this and that. Well, they're trying to inject you with an energy that they want to have reciprocated somehow. Sometimes this is also in the form of just basic things like compliments. But vampires, you have to recognize, they don't feed on the compliment, and they don't feed on the emotion itself. These things are a conduit through which they can connect to your energy body through. So when someone pays you a compliment, that creates a spiritual connection. Even when they give you criticism, that does as well. But this kind of emotional strength, this strong emotional reaction or verbiage, this acknowledgement, creates a kind of tunnel through the astral where your energies connect, and you can connect to one another. Their subjective reality and your subjective reality are bumping together in such a way that they're very focused, and that objective little moment where you both are interacting with each other is a conduit through which energy flows, and you can feed upon that. So what am I getting at here? The book's coming out in about a week or so. All the things I'm talking about are mostly in the book, and I hope you guys find it useful. There will be some things in there that are maybe a little bit not okay for younger audiences. It's not a book for kids. There's conversations about bloodletting, about using sex a little bit. I'm not big into talking about sex in my books, but there's definitely mention of sex and how this can be used for feeding, and there's definitely things that aren't for everybody. But this book is going to be sort of a general overview of the subject. It's not meant to be the most unique book. It's meant to be the most accurate book, if that makes sense. I'm trying to put in there things that I believe, that I practice. There will be an initiatory rite with beautiful dark maiden, dark mother, dark matron Lilith, sanguine Lilith, who is, in pop culture, she's been used as one of the origins of vampirism, and it fits in the, spiritual, esoteric sense that she would be as well. Her history is completely wrapped up with vampiric lore, whether it was intentional or not. It's certainly not pop culture. If you go back far enough, her and her children like to drink the blood of innocent people, especially children. So, it's absolutely in the lore. So she's a big part of this book, and in fact it's dedicated to her. So anyway, guys, this was kind of an all over the place video, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys are looking forward to this book as much as I am to releasing it. I also have a sort of early announcement. I am going to be working on hopefully some video instruction courses to supplement what I do with my mentorship program. So for those of you who can't be part of my mentorship program, or you like my books and you want to have a more video presentation to go along with those books, something to help fill in the gaps, those will be coming out shortly. I can't give you quite a timeline on it. I'm thinking probably sometime before the end of summer, so sometime by September, maybe earlier, and it'll probably come out in a staged release where I'll probably have some fundamental videos, then some technique videos, we'll put it that way, technique videos, demonstrations, and things of that nature. So for those of you who are interested in that stuff, make sure you stay tuned. Make sure you go to my website, www.mindtheshadows.com. Make sure you have that bookmark. Make sure you have there's somewhere on there that you can click to be notified when there's new posts, so you can keep your eyes peeled for that. And of course, just make sure you like and subscribe this channel. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you comment. And if you want to support my work in the meantime, you can of course go down into the description of this video. In fact, JD Temple just told me, start putting these things in the first comment. So I'm going to pin a first comment with a lot of this stuff, just to annoy people. But in the description, at least for now, there's going to be links to my current books. You have Become the Maelstrom, which is my central core book of magic. You really shouldn't be working with my systems unless you're familiar with that book, at least on some level. My next book was Shadownomicon, and the next book coming out is going to be the Infernal Vampire Handbook, and I hope you guys are interested in that. I'll be flashing probably the screenshot of the cover a few times throughout this conversation. So you can buy those things on Amazon in the links below. You can also go to Patreon if you want to support me with just a small donation. Currently there's tiers for $3.9, and I'm probably going to add a $20 because some people are asking for it. You can of course also go to Teespring and buy awesome tapestries like this Lucifer tapestry, and stuff like that. I have a lot of things that you guys can look at, and if you guys get into it, let me know. All right, anyway guys, thanks a lot. Mind the shadows.